I thought I was a good leader. But with a little bit of perspective and time, I look back on that guy and I understand I wasn't nearly as effective with my team as I could have been. That's why I started doing what now I am unbelievably honored to do with you guys. Because I want to hopefully help you guys keep away from stepping in some of the potholes that I did along the way. And I want to make sure we accelerate your speed and shorten your path to building the culture that's going to help you and your team be that much more effective and that much more successful moving forward. As a young coach, I won a lot of games coaching freshmen and JV teams. Turns out the teams that I was coaching had a whole lot of talent. Now, we're all in the talent acquisition business, true story. And as a ninth grade and JV coach, I was kind of blessed to have pretty good players, so I won a lot of games. I thought I was a pretty good coach. And then I took over my very first head coaching job. Remember when you left that other firm and you started on your own? Remember those first steps and kind of starting the bank account and putting together the flyers and the website, and you go in with that same old bucket. Well, mine was a bucket of male ego. Anybody ever deal with that? And I went into coaching Pope High School girls basketball program after winning a whole lot of games as a ninth and a JV coach with a pretty full bucket of that male ego. What you see there on the screen is me 26 games later. And if you notice, the guy in the circle there, he can't even stand to watch what was happening on the court. I had gone in with energy and enthusiasm and expectations, and I thought that my X's and O's and press attack and strategy was going to get us to the state tournament. And we were going to have so much. Again, I've done nothing but won games, done nothing but succeed. And at the end of that game, I remember coming off the court into the back hallway of what was still a noisy gym because it was during the region playoffs, and our team had just lost in the region playoffs. And I'm standing in the back hallway as the team's coming off the court with their equipment. And there's Zandy and Caroline, and I'll never forget the look on Casey's face when she walked by. Because all season long, Casey had been that upbeat, energetic kid. But after 21 losses, her chin was in her chest and she just looked beat down. As I'm standing in that back hallway and the kids are going into the locker room, I will never forget the song that I heard coming out of the gym. It was Daniel Powder's "Had a Bad Day." I could relate, and from the look on the kids' faces, you could probably imagine that very first season as a leader, as a head coach, was not as successful as I had hoped. That bucket was just about empty. So I gave the kids a minute, and you go over and you knock on the locker room door, because when you're coaching young ladies, you understand you need to knock. Gave them a couple of moments. You could hear this muffled, "Yeah, we're good." So my assistant and I push open the locker room door, and we turn the corner, and we walk in, and there they are, spread out in the locker room. Some have faces in their hands, and some are staring out into space, just sighing. And so you bring them all together, and you give them that end of the season obligatory kind of motivational, appreciative talk that you're going to have before the banquet's coming. And in that last locker room, you tell them, "Ladies, I can't tell you how proud I am with the progress we've made this season. I'm so excited about what we're building moving forward," and I meant every word. But the message was flat, because inside, I'm pretty upset too. As a coach, we had just lost our 21st game. We were 5-21. That's an 80% failure rate. You're probably not keeping your job at an 80% failure rate. So they're getting their stuff together, and I'll walk over, and I'll never forget splashing some water on my face. And I'll look up, and I'm sure this has happened to each person in here. I had a mirror moment. You know that unexpected instant when you realize it's the person staring back at you who's responsible for making things better. My frustration in that moment was due to the fact that for all the success I had had in my previous roles, I had done everything I knew to do leading the team. I didn't know what to do differently. I didn't know what they needed. So I go over, and I'm standing as the kids are getting up to leave. And there's Coach Minifield, and here I am. And we're standing with our backs literally against that concrete block wall that's, every high school gym is made of. And as the kids leave, there's Caroline and Zandy and Allison and Casey. And they're walking out one by one as individuals. It's in that moment that my life changed. Because Coach Minifield, who had been with me at the previous job where we had won a lot, taps me on the shoulder, says, "Hey, Coach, if we're going to win more games next year, we got to build better relationships." See, the girls hadn't walked out hands over somebody's shoulder or talking to each other. They had walked out one by one as individuals. And they didn't leave the locker room that night one by one because we had lost that last game. We lost that game and 20 others my first season as a head coach because all season long, I'd allowed them to walk around as individuals. And so I realized one of the things that I could do differently, because I've been so invested and so focused upon strategy and skills and weights and conditioning and all the rational, logical, kind of left brain stuff that I had honestly completely neglected all the connection stuff. And I literally made it my purpose that next few months of our off season to travel around driving in my red Jeep Cherokee, travel around the Southeast, visiting other college coaches that I'd reached out to in 1996-ish. Tell me, what do you do to build culture? Not about a press attack or a zone offense or strategic kind of X's and O's, but what do you do to build connections and relationships and get buy-in from your players so they become comrades and people that care about each other? In that second season at Pope High School, coaching that same group of girls, we were intentional about spending as much time on relationships as we did on rebounds. We did volunteer work together as a team. We had meals every week together as a team. They had sleepovers together as a team. But we made sure that we focused upon the relationships that I had neglected. And I remember standing in that exact same gym just about a year to the day that we had lost our 21st game that first year. That I had watched them walk off the court with their chins down on their chests, just dragging themselves down the hallway. But the second season, with the exact same top 7 players, they came off the court from our region playoff game, and they're laughing and jumping and screaming and high-fiving and making their way to the locker room, just hugging each other, because we had won 19 games and a trip to the state tournament for the first time in years. Not because the team was any different, but because the team had become completely different. And what I would like to start off by asking you is, yeah, that was me. I had neglected some of the connection and some of the relationships and some of the culture that would have allowed our strategy to be so much more successful. And I wonder, as you sit here today and you think about the team that you've begun to build or the team that you already have built and want to sustain and continue to grow, has that in some ways been you too? See, the reality is strategy is what you need to get done. Strategy is your to-do list. Strategy is that plan that you have put together. But culture will always determine how well your strategy is implemented by those people. And I want to share today some questions for you to consider and hopefully some tools and insights that you're going to be able to act on and apply so that you're a better leader and your team is that much more positive and productive, not because you're doing more stuff. You've got enough stuff to do, but because you think a little bit differently about how you go about that. Sound okay? So again, you're wondering 2 things. First is, why is this guy here and who is this guy? Well, again, I've already mentioned, I was a high school basketball coach for almost 30 years. Taught literature, coached basketball. That's a weird combination, by the way. And it was as a basketball coach that I began to appreciate the impact that culture had on team performance. We won a whole lot more ball games, and our days and practices together were so much more positive and enjoyable when I gave attention and was intentional about focusing on culture as part of that process of us growing as team members. And so I wrote the book Rapid Teamwork specifically about what are the 5 specific areas that you'll want to focus on, that we focused on, in order to build a more successful team. Here's a pretty good book. That's the part where you guys laugh. But the why do you care part is something where I want to share some specific statistics. So it's not just Sean saying it. These are some people who have gotten a whole lot more degrees than I do. that are basically saying, hey, we've done some research and this culture stuff might be something you want to pay attention to. Specifically, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Gallup organization. Every year they put out the global survey results about who's engaged and how many workers are not engaged. And basically 80% of the world work employees have been defined by Gallup as disengaged, not bought in, not actively being a part of a successful team. Gallup just a few years ago said that managers, this is the part where you look in the mirror, that leaders and managers are responsible for 70% of the deviation in team performance. That you give this exact same team to a different manager, and you can see up to 70% difference in terms of their performance based upon how good that leader is. What is that leader focused on? What type of interactions is he or she having? In WorkHuman just last year, they mentioned from a survey research project they did, 88% of the people that you're looking to hire, 88% of the people that Ken is helping to connect you to, say that culture is one of the main things they think about in terms of taking a position. And specifically, 33% revenue increase can be good, but culture is going to be what attracts to you and your organization the high quality, the talent that you're looking to acquire. Make sense? And people are going to ask about your culture before they become part of it. Your job as a leader, and this is something I share with people in just about any industry you can imagine. Your job as a leader is to take care of two things. You are responsible for results and for retention that contributes to those results. The issue is the retention and results are always going to be affected by the culture that you as a leader take ownership of affecting. Culture is always going to be a symptom of your leadership. So if your culture is not where it needs to be, it's you looking in the mirror that determines what's going to change and improve that culture. That said, leadership is absolutely a very different set of skills than what made you successful as a designer. True story? There are different things we need to learn to lead individuals and to build a culture that are completely different than what makes us successful with our clients. So that said, I want to make sure I reiterate, you are in the talent acquisition business. Talent is essential. It was the exact same way with the basketball team. If we weren't talented, we weren't going to win many games regardless of how good our culture is. Make sense? But if talent is going to be the basement floor, character and culture become the ceiling of the success you get to enjoy. And while talent is essential, it is never sufficient. And our job as leaders is to maximize that talent and maximize the engagement of that talent because we take ownership of the culture that that talent can then thrive in. So 3 things I want to make sure we're accomplishing. First is I want you guys to have some fun. I promise I'm not going to be talking the entire time. That would be ridiculously horrible for you guys to put up with. I want to make sure I keep you awake by getting you a chance to move around a little bit. But in addition to having some fun, I want to give you some insights and some tools and some things to be able to implement as a leader specifically when you go back to your team so that you lead more effectively and so that you build a more effective culture. Quick question.
Is the word talent and skill synonymous?
I think it can be, depending upon your usage. I think that talent encompasses not just the specific skills they bring, but the attitude that they bring with that skill. And so we'll get a little bit into that later on. I appreciate your question. We will have time for questions later on. I want to make sure I'm very respectful of your time and I get through as much possible information as I can. That said, there are 5 specific areas of culture that hopefully you will be intentional about moving forward that will absolutely define how successful, how positive and healthy and profitable your culture becomes. And again, the how to build a great team is an unbelievably cheesy acronym. Great has everything to do with the 5 areas that I will hope you will be intentional about moving forward after this afternoon. Goals and relationships and expectations and accountability and thanks. The reality is that a lot of the stuff I'm going to share is going to be for some of you guys like the deodorant behind me. Some of us are going to think the person next to us needs it more than we do. That's the next part where you're supposed to laugh. And I say that because as a leader, there are going to be some of these things that you know you're doing very well. Some of these things you have already defined and been intentional about and been very clear with, and that your team excels at. However, I have found that where a majority of leaders can be strong in one or two areas, there's generally one or two of those 5 areas where maybe they've neglected giving the attention that would give their teams a chance to be that much better. So I'm going to invite you, before we kind of get into a lot of the content, if you would like, you can use your phones and that QR code and get access to over 60 now resources and downloadables and guides and handouts and activities that you're going to be able to use with your team, in addition to getting the full audio version of the Rapid Teamwork book that you may prefer to listen to instead of to read. And I'm going to be sharing this later on in the program as well, but I wanted to give you a chance to go ahead and get started there. This is also in your handout packet that Kristen was amazing in putting together for you. There's that session 2 information where many of you guys have already opened it up to my session. That said, having been a coach, I need to go ahead and begin with the very well-known phrase, there's no I. Hear the energy there, Gail? Huh? Some of us had more coffee than others. That's okay. I will tell you, having coached for nearly 3 decades, I heard that thousands and thousands of times. And today I stand in front of you to say I completely disagree. Every athlete I have ever coached, every student I have ever had the honor of teaching was first and foremost concerned with him or herself. The most important person in your world stared back at you in the mirror this morning when you were brushing your teeth. True story? Yes. And so the question was, for me as a coach, and now you also as a leader, how do we get those individuals whose tendency as humans is to focus first and foremost on themselves? How do we get those individuals to be part of a team? To buy into the vision we have for our organization? And the best answer I've come up with in the last 30 years is this. Your job is to do all you can as a leader to get the people around you to do the following. To be a small contributing part of something larger and more significant than themselves. To be a small contributing part of something larger and more significant than themselves. And as you look back, and this is a very diverse room in terms of ages and backgrounds and where we've come from geographically, but if you think about any joy that you've experienced in the past and any joy that you are looking forward to in the future, it is always as a small contributing part of something larger and more significant than yourself. And I wanted there to be pride in our athletes and players of being a part of something that they could always be proud of having been a part of. That said, any organization, not just athletes, but employees in your industry, sometimes aren't part of that team, don't see themselves as a small contributing part because they feel isolated. Specifically, after a few years ago, that's been an issue, but I've been giving this talk far more than 4 years, and the reality is most of your employees at some point may have felt isolated, that they were fighting the battle alone, that they didn't have the connection or the support or the resources or the relationship to help them be better in their role. And I will never forget, as a first-year teacher, I'm at Pebblebrook High School in 1992. That's a long time ago. And I walk into the main hallway of Pebblebrook High School, and I turned left, and I went down to the end of the hall and turned right. The last door on the right was my room. I was a first-year teacher. Never planned to teach. I was going to be an attorney, got a degree in English, didn't get into law school, so I was going to teach for a year. And I think I made maybe $15,000 my first year as a teacher because it was a provisional certificate. I wasn't even fully certified. So I'm taking teacher certification classes while I'm actually teaching class. And I knew the content, but knowing the content, knowing how to teach it are two very different things. And I'm standing in that room a few days before the students are going to show up the next week. We're during pre-planning. And Lane Dye, and I love to share her name to honor her contribution to my career and to the students that put up with me that first year. She walks in with a legal box full of files. There were no digital files in 1992. And she puts them on a desk and she says, "Hey, Sean, I'm not teaching 9th grade literature this year. Thought this might be helpful. Let me know if there's anything else I can share with you." And she turned and left. And as an older teacher, I realized how wonderfully courageous and considerate Lane had been. Because as a young teacher, I was way too proud and full of ego to ever ask for the help that I needed and my students would have benefited from. And she was willing to reach out and kind of break down some of what had felt isolated to me as well.